exile. That's the solution, and I'm afraid it's the only solution.
The priceless Windsor Crown, a historic symbol of power destined for Princess Catherine. Yet the shock that rocked the royal family had nothing to do with a bold thief inside. Look, this dirty heist was born purely out of Queen Camilla's burning jealousy. But Queen Camilla had absolutely no idea that Prince William was already playing. Taking full control of the high-tech security system, he caught the henchman red-handed and walked. At that moment, the royal family wore stripped away its polite aristocratic mask, now holding ironclad evidence that could easily tear down an empire. Or will this public shame spark an even more terrifying and permanent collapse? Inside her private bedroom, Queen Camilla sat bathed in the eerie cold light coming. She remained frozen on her plush velvet sofa, her eyes bloodshot with intent. Down on the pavements, the massive crowd held up signs with Kate's name, their faces glowing. Yet the sight that made Queen Camilla's chest tighten as if thousands of sharp needles. Instead, her eyes were glued to the top right corner of the screen where the station displayed the iconic Windsor Crown. That solid block of pure gold. In less than 12 hours, the very moment the morning sun climbed into the sky, that for Queen Camilla, that gold was far more than just some lifeless, sparkling jewellery. The entire world would look at the young princess and see her as the sole true face of decades of dealing with cold glances and thousands of painful, forced smiles. Queen Camilla simply could not let that happen. She would honestly rather burn the entire... Her hand clenched tight, her nails digging deep into her palm. She grabbed a crisp, dark red liquid splashed everywhere, dripping slowly down the pricey wall. He had worked for Queen Camilla for years, quietly cleaning up 100 different messes in the dark. Queen Camilla's face twisted, showing a terrifying mix of her deepest fear of being... She stood up with a sudden jerk, marching over to Thomas with long, aggressive... Reaching into the deep pocket of her heavy wool coat, Queen Camilla pulled out a stack of slides. The assistant scrambled to catch them. He took one look, and the colour instantly drained. They were secret, candid shots of Thomas's younger brother, sitting at a table in a notorious... Tall piles of cash lay on the table in front of him, and standing right behind his chair, lowering her voice to a whisper, she let each word hiss through her teeth like a razor. Thomas had to sneak into the high-security treasure vault that very night. She did not care where he ended up hiding it, whether he buried it deep in the dirt, or all she cared about was making sure that when the global media pointed their lenses to a total public slap in the face that could never be repaired. Thomas opened. He desperately tried to stammer out some excuses, pointing out the advanced security measure, but Queen Camilla cut him off instantly. She pointed her finger directly at the heavy... If that crown was still sitting inside its display case by 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, not only would Thomas's brother face a cold prison cell, and those violent underworld debt collectors would show up directly at his elderly... No way out, not a single loophole left for negotiation. The very survival of his entire family was now directly tied to a He bowed his head low, slowly backing out of the room. In the dim light, Queen Camilla, a cruel, triumphant smile crept across her lips. She turned back to watch. It was 2:45 in the morning. The massive palace grounds were wrapped in a heavy... Dressed completely in tight black clothing, Thomas pressed his back hard against a massive... He reached up to wipe away the cold sweat dripping down his face. His heart was racing. He glanced down at the glowing dial of his wristwatch. The tiny second hand kept... There would be exactly 3 minutes of leniency when the South Gate guards moved straight through. A tight 3-minute countdown. That was his entire window to complete this dirty... The rhythmic, heavy thud of leather boots on the hard granite floor slowly faded toward He moved as swiftly as a phantom sliding along the seemingly endless stone wall. Squeezing his body through the thick oak door, he carefully stepped onto the dark stairs leading... The air down here changed completely. A sudden chill enveloped him, carrying... He quietly tiptoed past 2 winding turns, heading straight for the massive... This was where the nation's most priceless artifacts were kept. But it was an illegally cloned keycard copied directly from the high-level internal... The exact card Camilla herself had secretly passed to him just last week. Running his fingers along the plastic surface, he took a deep, steadying breath to stop his hands from... The red indicator light flashed twice on the panel, and then it turned green. With a faint click, the heavy steel door slowly cracked open, leaving just enough space for us. Thomas squeezed his way inside, using all his strength to pull the heavy door shut. He clicked on the small tactical flashlight attached right to his shoulder. A pale, weak white beam swept across the towering glass display cases. He paid absolutely no attention to them. His eyes darted frantically. Suddenly, the flashlight beam stopped dead in the very centre of the room, resting entirely. Sitting there was a dark red velvet box. Its gold clasp gleamed. He set a heavy lead-lined bag that he had brought with him down onto the cold floor. That thick lead lining was specially designed to block any high-frequency radio traffic. He reached deep into his heavy coat pocket and pulled out a specialized set of stainless. His black-gloved hand slowly and carefully slipped a flat, razor-thin piece. If he could just lift the glass snatch, the red velvet box, toss it all into the lead bag. Gritting his teeth, he channeled all his nervous strength into his thumb, pressing the metal bar. With just a tiny bit more force, the royal family's entire multi-million-dollar security effort, Camilla would finally get exactly what she wanted. Kate would lose all her. Thomas was absolutely convinced he was operating in a perfect blind spot. Both he and his powerful master, who was sitting comfortably in an expensive chair up. Little did they actually know their darkest, most desperate deeds were currently being laid bare. 2 floors above the silent vault in Prince William's private study, not a single lamp was lit. Prince William sat perfectly motionless in his leather armchair, his back completely straight. The preparations didn't start tonight. Everything had been planned exactly 1 month ago. On the quiet morning, he accidentally, a tiny microscopic scratch on the edge of that velvet lining had instantly, without throwing any sudden fit of rage and without ever complaining to the palace security, he secretly contacted a highly skilled independent expert from the outside. William had personally spent several long nights implanting micro cameras. He had created an entirely independent and secure personal surveillance system. The high-definition infrared feed piercing right through the dark clearly displayed. Sitting with his arms crossed tightly, William kept his face as tense and rigid as a marble. He silently watched the assistant completely ignore all the other priceless artifacts, watching the man pull the steel tools slowly from his coat. All of William's worst. This was absolutely not a typical theft for simple financial gain. Targeting that crown meant aiming directly at Catherine's honour, her pride. And William understood all too well that a spineless, cowardly assistant like Thomas, the real puppet master, the only person with a motive to shatter Kate's glory, he did not call the chief of the guards to sound the alarm. Doing so now would only trigger. The true mastermind would instantly sever every tie, erase all traces, and to rip this poisonous tree out by its very roots, William had to catch them red-handed. He required absolute living proof. Instantly William sprang to his feet. He snatched his tablet, threw on a long black wool overcoat that swept past his knee. He purposely hugged the walls where the plush carpet was thickest, making sure he bounded down the dark stone stairwell, heading straight underground, where William's handsome face no longer wore the calm, polite expression usually kept. William knew he had only a few fleeting minutes before the assistant cracked the display cases. This merciless hunt in the shadows was officially closing its net. Deep inside the suffocating underground vault, Thomas held his breath, his tense wrist flexed, preparing to finally pry the lock open. In just one more split second, the red velvet box holding the Windsor Crown would be. Suddenly the entire bank of high-powered floodlights on the vault's ceiling flared to life. The sudden blinding assault of light made Thomas jolt, squeezing his eyes shut in pain. Every muscle in his body seized up in pure paralyzing panic. Stumbling a step backward, he threw his arms up to shield his burning eyes. He waited for the ear-piercing scream of the alarm siren. He waited for the shouts but there was absolutely nothing. Only a spine-chilling silence pressing hard. Thomas cracked one eye open and slowly began to lower his hands. The brilliant light reflecting off the glass display cases disoriented his vision It wasn't the head of security. It wasn't a patrolling guard. It was Prince William. Stood there with his arms tightly crossed, wearing his long black overcoat. His angular face was completely rigid, as if carved from an eternal block of ice. His eyes, which usually held a polite, welcoming warmth before the cameras were pitch, the blood in his veins instantly turned to ice. He opened his mouth. He began to back away step by step until his spine slammed hard against the sharp. He hastily hid his black-gloved hands behind his back in an instinctual yet complete. That absolute heavy silence was the most terrifying weapon of psychological torture. He slowly stepped forward, walking directly toward Thomas. His pace was steady. With every step William took, Thomas felt the noose tightening slowly around his neck. He stammered, "Your Highness," his voice broken, trembling and high-pitched, like the He tried desperately to force a twisted, pathetic smile. "I am on duty, yes, a surprise inspection. The Queen requested that I personally..." The cheap lie spilled from Thomas's mouth, but even he could feel how absurd and William stopped. The distance between the two men was now barely less than 2 paces. William slowly raised his hand, lifting the digital tablet he had been carrying at his side. The screen was still glowing brightly. On it, the entire infrared security creeping into the vault, ignoring everything else to make a beeline for the center pedestal. Every single pixel was razor sharp. The high-angle camera shot captured everything, leaving absolutely no blind spot. Thomas stared blankly at the looping security video on the screen, his eyes bulging. His fragile facade of lies had just been completely and mercilessly stripped away. He suddenly realized that his shadowy deeds had not fooled a single soul. William's voice rang out clearly. It was not loud or particularly harsh. "You have exactly 10 seconds to give me a single reason why I should not have the police drag you out of here on charges of treason." He grovelled desperately at William's feet, his shaking hands wringing the wet hem of his... He completely surrendered. Any lingering loyalty to Camilla meant absolutely... Between heavy choking sobs, Thomas confessed everything. He confessed how Camilla had explicitly threatened to ruin his entire family, and he confessed that the ultimate goal was never to steal the crown for money, but to hide it, just a hollow symbol without a crown on her most important day. William stood looking down at the cowering henchman, the corner of his lips curling into a frigid... The mere word of an assistant could easily be completely denied by Camilla. William needed hard, irrefutable proof, a weapon sharp enough to pierce right... As if reading the cold, cruel expectation in William's eyes, and perhaps his trembling fingers fished out a tiny black rectangular object. It was a minute. She never leaves any kind of paper trail, and she never sends texts. Thomas stuttered, holding the recorder up with both hands like a sacred offering. He explained that he always turned this device on in his pocket. Whenever she called him, "On here is her exact voice giving me the order tonight." William slowly reached. He firmly pressed the play button on its side. A brief burst of loud static hissed. The sharp, shrill voice, dripping with Camilla's frantic malice and envy, echoed. She did not care where he hid it. She just wanted Kate to have absolutely nothing. William pressed the stop button. The space plunged back into total silence. The crucial evidence was securely held in the palm of his hand. He looked down at the assistant grovelling on the floor, his cold gaze as indifferent as if he was ordered to get off the estate and never show his face again. If he breathed, Thomas, as if he had just been pardoned from the gallows, continuously bowed his head. He scrambled quickly to his feet, snatched up the empty lead-lined bag and stumbled out of... Suddenly William was left completely alone in the silent centre of the cold vault. He turned to look at the red velvet box containing the Windsor Crown, which was still resting. William gripped the tiny voice recorder tightly in his hand. This small piece of... He turned his back, taking long, confident strides out of the vault. The tedious game. Now it was time to go upstairs and usurp the throne of the true mastermind. The first rays of dawn pierced through the thick silk curtains, illuminating Queen Camilla, draped in an extremely expensive silk robe. Her hair had already been... Camilla pursed her lips, applying a smooth coat of dark red lipstick. She imagined the panicked security team reporting the missing item, and Princess Catherine, with tears streaming as she realized she would have to step onto the balcony. Camilla turned her head slightly quietly, admiring her own reflection in the mirror. She was absolutely certain that her dark scheme from the night before had been suddenly the heavy closed oak door of the bedroom was violently shoved inward without a sing. The force was so strong that the wood slammed hard against the adjacent wall. She spun around in a rage, ready to hurl curses at whatever insolent servant did, but the harsh reprimand choked right in her throat. Prince William, and yet the icy aura radiating off him had none of his usual polite charm. It was absolute dominance, overwhelming and breathtakingly cold. Camilla sprang up in a desperate attempt to regain her arrogant stance, tilting her but a slight tremor in her voice betrayed her tough exterior. William did not answer. A tiny black object flew from his hand, landing with a sharp clatter on her It was Thomas's voice recorder. Camilla stared blankly at the strange little device. Her heart skipped a terrifying beat. She instantly recognized her assistant. A dark, terrifying premonition crashed down on her mind like a boulder. The static hissed softly. And then right in that bright sunlit room, she wanted that little girl to have absolutely nothing to wear on her head tomorrow. Her legs gave out, losing all their strength. She collapsed onto the velvet. The once meticulously made-up face was now completely crumpled, ashen, and utterly. Her eyes went wide, staring blankly at the voice recorder, as if looking at a monster. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling uncontrollably, trying to force out some sound. Stammering, she insisted it was a complete misunderstanding, a trick, but William told her she was. William cut her off with a flat, quiet tone that carried no anger but dripped with abs. The bright screen lit up, showing the pathetic image of Thomas grovelling. He confessed to every detail of Camilla's despicable blackmail. William leaned down low, planting both of his hands on the vanity, forcing Camilla's pale face. He asked her if she thought she was playing some game of power and if a cheap, filthy heist could ever. No, it only proved one single truth to the entire world. She was Camilla shrank back, not daring to look William in the eyes. She knew deep down that all the evidence was locked down tight. There was absolutely no way out, and no one. He delivered his final verdict, sharp and ruthless as a descending guillotine. William wouldn't let her filthy existence smear the royal family's honour across the tabloid. But from this moment on, she had officially vanished. She would have to cite a. This applied to all future events as well, and she would be stripped of every single pub. She would quietly pack her things, get out of the palace, and move to the remote estate in the north. Camilla's mouth hung wide open, and tears began to well up in her heavily lined eyes. Powerless, locked away forever in dark, cold oblivion. For someone who constantly craved attention like her, it was a torture far more agonizing. She slumped her head onto the table, her choked, despairing sobs echoing through the cold room. William offered her absolutely no pity. He turned on his heel and walked cold. Just 3 hours later, tens of thousands of citizens packed the streets leading to the ground. Tens of thousands of hands waved colourful flags. Millions of eager eyes. The main balcony doors swung wide open. Princess Catherine stepped outside. Resting beautifully and securely atop her head was the historic Windsor Crown. Hundreds of diamonds sparkled, reflecting the bright sunlight, shattering all darks. His eyes held the steady peace of a man who had utterly annihilated every. In a dark, cramped living room at a remote, isolated estate in the middle of the dense wood, and no bustling servants, Queen Camilla, dressed in old, worn-out clothes, sat. She bit her lip until it bled. Her dark, despairing eyes were glued to the Reaching up to touch her tangled hair, she felt nothing, no crown. Her heart, the absolute greatest punishment, had fallen upon her. Not a prison of iron. Finally, the villain had lost everything. The heavy silence of the forest outside felt like a thick black velvet curtain. The final verdict has been carried out, and truth has triumphed. But deep. So what do you make of this dramatic ending? Is the quiet surrender of a court, with Catherine now fully holding the massive power of the Windsor Crown. Will she keep ruling with her signature grace? Or will the sharp fangs of this royal... Remember to like, share and subscribe for more. Do not forget to click the next video on